Under the pale light of a rising autumn sun, the mountain valley stirred with the sound of iron on iron. The ring of a hammer echoed between the ridges, sharp, steady, and alive. Each strike sent sparks scattering into the cold morning air, tiny bursts of orange against the blue chill. At the center of it all stood Elias Crow, sleeves rolled to the elbow, face blackened with soot, muscles coiled from years at the forge. The smell of wood smoke, hot metal, and sweat mixed in the wind, and for a moment it was as if the wilderness itself breathed in rhythm with his hammer. This was not just the sound of work, it was the sound of survival, the heartbeat of the frontier. The year was 1823. The nearest town lay more than 100 miles to the east, beyond forests and rivers that few dared to cross. Here, in a small clearing carved from the pines, a handful of settlers had built cabins of rough-hewn logs and staked their hopes on the land. They called it Crow's Hollow, though it was little more than smoke, timber, and prayer. Elias had followed the wagon trails west with a cart of iron scraps and a stubborn faith that fire could tame any wilderness. Where others carried rifles, he carried a hammer. Every community that dared the frontier depended on men like him. The blacksmiths who built civilization one spark at a time. From his forge came the things no one could live without. The axe that split the logs, the trap that caught the beaver, the iron pot that boiled the stew. When wagon wheels cracked or rifle barrels bent, it was Elias who made them whole again. He worked with what he could find, horseshoes, nails, bits of broken chain, hammering them flat, shaping them into tools for a new world. The frontier was a land of endless beauty and equal peril. The mountains that glowed gold at sunset turned cruel when the snows came early. By late October, the ridgelines already wore a thin crown of white, and the wind had grown restless, whispering through the pines with a voice that promised winter. Elias knew the signs. The deer had moved lower down the slopes, and the river ice formed earlier each morning. Soon, the trails would vanish under drifts so deep that even the wolves would hesitate to cross them. That morning, he paused between hammer blows and stared toward the distant peaks. His iron stores were nearly gone. The wagon that once carried his supplies had long since broken down, and the trade routes had gone quiet. Without fresh metal, he could forge no new tools. Without tools, the settlers could not build, could not hunt, could not survive the cold to come. Around him, the camp had grown silent. The sound of axes in the woods had faded. People were hoarding what they had left. A few nails, a half-sharpened saw blade, a rusted knife edge. When the last of his charcoal turned to ash, Elias set his hammer aside and sat before the cooling forge. The coals glowed faintly, pulsing like the embers of his own resolve. He thought of the people who depended on him. The young family in the lower cabin whose roof still leaked, the trapper who needed new teeth set into his steel jaws before the rivers froze. He thought of the promise he had made when he came west, that he would build, not break, create, not take. Yet even the strongest hands were useless without the raw material to shape. That night, frost gathered thick on the window glass of his small cabin. The moon rose white over the ridges, and from the woods came the long, lonely howl of a wolf. Elias sat at his table with a piece of rough parchment and a stub of charcoal, sketching crude plans by firelight. He traced the outline of a furnace he had once seen built from river clay, the sort used by early blacksmiths before there were towns or traders. Somewhere in those mountains lay iron. Not bars, not nails, but stone rich with ore. If he could find it, he could smelt his own supply and give the settlement another chance. It would not be an easy journey. The nearest outcroppings were days away, through deep timber and rising snow. The trail crossed rivers known to flood and cliffs that shed rock without warning. He would have to travel light, a sled for his tools, a rifle for wolves, and enough dried meat to last a week. But the decision had already been made in his heart. To stay meant surrender. To go meant risk. Yet risk was the price every frontierman paid. At dawn, he doused the forge for what might be the last time and packed his gear. The anvil, too heavy to carry, he covered with canvas and pine boughs, as if burying an old friend. He hitched his mules to the sled, loaded with bellows, hammer, tongs, and the few lumps of charcoal he still possessed. The settlers gathered to see him off, their breath fogging in the icy air. No one spoke much. They didn't have to. The look in their eyes said enough. Go, and come back. The first miles were easy, the ground still frozen but clear. The trail wound along the river, where mist rose from the water like ghosts. Elias stopped often to listen, for cracking ice, for movement in the woods, for the distant moan of the wind through the pines. Each sound reminded him how far he had come from the safety of towns and cobblestone streets. Here, every echo could be warning or blessing. By midday, clouds had gathered, thick and grey, pressing low against the peaks. Snow began to fall, slow at first, then steady, then heavy. By nightfall, he had reached the mouth of a narrow ravine where the rock glimmered dark beneath the snow. He built a small shelter from spruce branches and lit a fire, the smoke curling blue into the cold. As he melted snow for water, He thought again of the forge, the steady rhythm, the glow of iron under hammer, the comfort of creation. He missed that sound already. But the mountain had its own rhythm now. The whisper of snow, the pop of the fire, the beating of his heart against the silence. In the morning, he began to search the rock face for signs of ore, veins of reddish stone, heavy with iron. Using a small pick, he chipped at the surface, his breath coming in visible bursts. The work was slow, the cold biting at his fingers even through gloves. But by afternoon, he found what he sought, a vein rich enough to fill his sled with stone. He wrapped each piece in canvas and loaded it carefully, his movements deliberate, reverent. The earth had given him what he needed. Now it was up to his hands to make it live. As he prepared to head back, the wind shifted. The temperature dropped suddenly, and a storm rolled down from the ridge, the kind that erased trails and men alike. Snow whipped through the ravine, stinging his face. The mules brayed nervously, hooves slipping on ice. Elias lashed the sled down and huddled beside the rock wall, shielding the fire as long as he could. The storm howled for hours, filling the night with sound and fury. When it finally broke, silence fell so complete that even his heartbeat seemed too loud. He rose stiffly, brushed the frost from his beard, and looked toward the trail. It was gone, buried under feet of snow. Somewhere behind those white hills lay Crow's Hollow, waiting. Somewhere inside him burned the same fire that had once glowed in his forge. He gripped his hammer tight, the metal cold against his palm. The mountain had taken his path, but not his purpose. He would find his way home. And when he did, he would bring back more than iron. He would bring back the proof that courage could be forged, just like steel, in the heart of the wilderness. The storm had passed, but the true test was only beginning.